lots were bought. Some of the lots were bought by white house builders or landlords and turned into boarding houses / rented rooms. And some were also bought by black households. The growth of this new settlement was the result of a population explosion that hit Providence after the American Revolution. The population had climbed to 7,600 by 1800 and then more than doubled by 1830. The main reason for this growing population was a general boom in the United States maritime trade. Providence at this point surpassed Newport, and new prosperity drew many people into town from the stagnating agricultural regions of the state. A bustling port, of course, needs lots of sailors, and it created jobs for folks who work in peripheral businesses, people like dock laborers, teamsters, shipbuilders, blacksmiths, and of course, tavern keepers and shopkeepers. Specifically, Providence's Black population, which is important for Snowtown, was also on the rise in the late 18th and early 19th century. As most of you probably know, many enslaved Africans passed through Rhode Island ports during the colonial period, bound for plantations in the southern colonies and on Caribbean islands. However, a good many remained in Rhode Island, where they labored as artisans, sailors, and in-house domestic laborers. And many also worked the livestock plantations that dotted South County. Freedom came in the wake of the revolution, but it did not come with a promise of land or a livelihood, so many Black freedmen moved to Providence in search of a new life. All of these people moving into Providence needed places to live, obviously, and so the city's boundaries expanded to encompass previously undesirable or marginal land, like that muddy foreshore at the base of the bluffs on the north side of the Cove. Now, this could be a pretty smelly place because the tides reached up to the Cove, and when the water was low, you got a strong whiff of rotting vegetation, mud, and salt. There were also tanneries and slaughterhouses further up the Mashassack that produced rather unpleasant industrial runoff. Finally, the foreshore was very vulnerable to storms like the hurricane of 1815. However, by 1820, two short streets extended south from Smith Street and made up what we now think of as Snowtown. The one further east was Gaspee Street, corresponding to the section where the modern road comes down south off of Smith Street. And the second to the west of it was called Back Street at first, and that doesn't really exist anymore. While the location was not the best, it did mean that the prices were low enough to allow some of the newly freed Black population to acquire land. It was also a place where sailors didn't mind spending a few days or weeks between voyages. Snowtown was the site of many cheap boarding houses for them, or for other wage laborers who couldn't afford to live in the nicer parts of town. This influx of sailors into Snowtown also offered many residents a golden opportunity to make a quick buck. The sailors are young, single guys. They're looking to cut loose and spend money after a long voyage. And they want liquor, food, entertainment, and sex. And there was a lot of money to be made in giving it to them. As a result of these trends, maritime expansion, the resulting illicit economy catering to all those sailors, the movement of free Black people into Providence, and along with several, the movement of free Blacks into Providence, Snowtown, and along with several other neighborhoods in the North End, developed reputations as both Black neighborhoods and as red light districts. The town council started getting a lot of complaints about Snowtown in the 1820s and 1830s, and it became a focus for mounting concerns about vice and social disorder. These concerns were, for many in Providence, confirmed by the Snowtown Riot, which Sparkle mentioned earlier, which occurred on September 21st through 24th, 1831. Most people, if they've heard of Snowtown before, this is how they know it. So this riot started as a brawl between two groups of sailors that had extended over several nights, which is not that uncommon an occurrence in these neighborhoods. So on September 21st, a crew off the steamboats gathered a crowd of nearly 100 people to attack a boarding house in Olney's Lane, where two Black sailors, Augustus Williams and his companion William Jordan, were staying. Olney's Lane is pretty much Olney Street now. And this is another one of these socially disordered neighborhoods that respectable Providence is worried about. Anyway, this group of sailors started throwing rocks at the building, a boarding house or brothel, where Williams and Jordan were staying. So at this point, one of those Black sailors, Williams or Jordan, produced a pistol and fired at the crowd. One of the shots struck and then mortally wounded a Swedish sailor named George Eriksson. And once word got out that a black man had shot a white man, another mob of local white men, mostly local young men and artisans, formed and proceeded to Olney's Lane to begin destroying the buildings there. Once they were done, they moved from Olney's Lane to Snowtown to do the same thing. Initial attempts by the sheriff and the militia to quell the riot were unsuccessful until on the 24th, as the mob attempted to return to Snowtown to continue their destruction, the state militia marched down Smith Hill and over the bridge from the west. At first, they fired in the air, but when that did nothing, the governor gave permission to fire into the crowd. The militia fired a single volley, killing 4 people, and within 5 minutes, the crowd dispersed. In all, the damage amounted to 8 buildings destroyed in Olney's Lane, and another 7 in Snowtown, either destroyed or severely damaged. And several others had either their windows or doors smashed in. One of the most obvious results of the riot was the formation of the city government in Providence. In the aftermath, people complained that the authorities had spent too much time dithering about whether, when, and if to call out the militia, and it was felt that putting a mayor with the powers of the sheriff at the head of the town council would mean that the mayor could then take decisive action in the event of further disorder. Around this time is also when the town watch expanded and professionalized to become the Providence Police Department. Note here that none of this was done to safeguard the property or safety of people from Snowtown. On the contrary, newspapers at the time framed the riot as a justifiable reaction to the disorder stemming from Snowtown and Olney's Lane. And the only problem was that the mob was doing what the city government should be doing, and they added, should have been doing. Now, most historical accounts of Snowtown end here, more or less. The assumption is that the riot destroyed the neighborhood for good, but that was not the case, however. The neighborhood survived and continued to change. As Irish immigration picked up in the 1840s, the demographics of the neighborhood shifted. Its reputation did not improve, though, and there are plenty of newspaper reports about police intervening in Snowtown well into the 19th century. The north shore of the Cove also continued to develop. Rhode Island's first state prison, which Heather is going to talk about here more in a moment, was built at Great Point, just southwest of Snowtown. That was in 1838, and it operated until 1878. More and more of the Cove was filled in. From the south, as downtown Providence continued expanding, and then from the north, as the railroads moved in, until all that was left was a circular body of water, which was called the Cove Basin. Now, the Cove Basin is a curious feature of Providence. On the one hand, it was surrounded by a tree-lined promenade, and there were plans at one point to actually build City Hall in the middle of the basin. On the other hand, as the railway companies never tired of saying, they claimed that it was a fetid cesspool and an eyesore and should be filled in. And they eventually won that argument, much to their own benefit. And it was the final filling in of the Cove and the expansion of the railways that finally destroys Snowtown in the early 1890s. And as we kind of wrap up this whirlwind history, I think there's a bit of irony that a place that was initially so marginal and undesirable is now a central location of commerce and government. And now over to Heather.
And as Andrew mentioned, by the end of the 19th century, Snowtown had disappeared amidst railroad expansion and construction of the new State House. For over 100 years, government officials, visitors, and travelers to Providence moved through the area unaware of the history beneath their feet. And so when in the late 1970s, the US Congress authorized improvements to Amtrak's Northeast Corridor, archaeologists from the engineering firm Duluth Parsons, or I call them DCP, were hired to conduct archaeological investigations in Providence. DCP identified 2 archaeological sites in and around the railroad tracks along Route 6 and near the downtown Amtrak station, collectively calling those sites the Providence Cove Lands Archaeological District. The 2 sites are known as the Carpenter's Point site and the North Shore site. DCP's excavators collected just over 148,000 artifacts, which included Native American artifacts, or what we call pre-contact, and historical or post-contact artifacts. The pre-contact materials date as far back as 5500 BC, up to the late woodland period, occurring right before European contact. The post-contact artifacts found at the sites are primarily from the 18th and 19th centuries. The Carpenter's Point site, with about 18,000 artifacts or so, was listed as a pre-contact site based on its undisturbed cultural features, even though only a quarter of the artifacts found there were from the pre-contact era. On the other hand, the North Shore site produced over 130,000 artifacts, 75,000 of which were from the post-contact period. DCP's excavations there also found evidence for pre-contact seasonal occupations by Native Americans, plus over 200 post-contact features, including the foundations of 6 single or multi-family houses, a brick kiln or furnace, 2 privies, and 2 railroad-relating buildings, all of which date to the 19th century. DCP traced the history of the site from the late 18th century into the 20th and found its connection to historical Snowtown and the later Irish immigrant community that grew up along Gaspee Street. The rich site history that the original excavators had begun to uncover highlighted the significance of the Providence Cove Lands archaeological collection, particularly with regards to its potential for shedding lights on the marginal communities so often overlooked or maligned by urban elites in 19th century accounts of the city. Because the remaining portions of both sites within the district were deeply buried by the Northeast Corridor project, the archaeological collection is one of the few avenues for future material culture research. Once the project had concluded, however, the Providence Cove Lands collection was stored in less than ideal conditions for more than 30 years, prompting action by the state to halt further damage. In 2013, Powell contracted with the Rhode Island Department of Transportation to rehabilitate the collection and conduct supplemental analyses of the archaeological assemblage. And this was the very beginning of my current obsession with this collection. The primary goals of Powell's work were to upgrade the condition of the collections to meet current state and federal standards and provide a comprehensive digital catalog to allow for an expansion of DCP's original interpretations with updated analytical methods and tools. This site was excavated in 1982. That was the year, I believe, they came out with the personal computer. So at that time, they only managed to catalog, I think, a total of about 30,000 out of the 150,000 artifacts that were part of this collection. So we were able to do a lot more these days than they were able to do 35 years ago. The North Shore archaeological site is found east of the Mashassack River, north of the Cove, and south of Smith Street. Buildings had appeared in the area by at least 1797, although no formal road system was plotted until about the 1840s. By 1808, Nicholas Brown had acquired the land from his father-in-law, Benjamin Stelly. Brown, who owned properties throughout Providence, rented portions of the Snowtown lands to tenants who built houses on those property lots. The North Shore site had been occupied by George Morse and his family, and other families who rented rooms in Morse's houses, throughout most of its existence in Snowtown. Morse, born in 1798 in Foxborough, Mass., arrived in Providence as early as 1814 and lived in the North Shore area by at least the early 1820s. In an 1869 newspaper account, George Morse testified in the land eviction case that in about 1826, he rented the land from Nicholas Brown, for whom he worked as a teamster, on which he built his house. Throughout his life, Morse worked as a teamster, dog catcher, laborer, drayman, butcher, and grocer. He first appears in the 1820 census and is listed in the 1824 Providence directory as a laborer living near Charles Street. Later directories list Morse's address as North Shore of Cove, with occupations of laborer and drayman, and by 1860, he was listed specifically at a numbered Gaspee Street address. During the initial analysis of the North Shore site post-contact assemblage, artifacts and subsurface cultural features like foundation walls, privies, wells, etc., relating to 3 main time periods were identified. What we call Snowtown, dating from the 1820s to the late 1840s, Gaspee Street, the late 1840s to early 1890s, and the railroad-related occupation from the 1830s and later. The range of activities implied by all the subsurface features and the artifacts show a widespread and intensive domestic use of the site, particularly during the Snowtown occupation period. However, the arrival of the railroad during the mid-19th century forced a major and rather dramatic shift from what had been a primarily residential and small business neighborhood to an exclusively industrial zone by the 1890s. The main Snowtown house that the Snowtown era features are 3 house foundations, one of which presumably was George Morse's original house, an industrial kiln or furnace foundation, 2 privies, and a variety of other related house yard elements. The furnace, with its large-scale construction and soapstone-lined interior, appears to have predated the 3 houses abandoned and filled in about 1820. And based on recent research, we believe that it was associated with Benjamin Stelly's soap and candle making manufactory in business on the property prior to 1820. The Snowtown era artifacts are a large and varied group. In total, about 32,000 artifacts are associated specifically with these Snowtown era households. In general, the assemblage is quite typical for what you would imagine an early to mid 19th century urban neighborhood would have had. The kitchen ceramics are predominantly refined earthenwares like creamware, pearlware, and whiteware in simple hand-painted or edge-decorated patterns, with some having fancier transfer printed designs. There are plain redwares and stonewares, that era's food prep and storage ceramics, in a variety of forms and patterns. Other more costly ceramics are mixed in, pink lusterware bone china, Castleford-style stoneware teapot fragments, and a black basalt teapot in the early 19th century revival style, likely made by the Wedgwood factories in England. There's a smattering of Chinese-style patterns, a fantastic creamware plate with embossed clover along the edge, and even a transfer printed picture with the scene of the Boston State House, which was manufactured in the 18 teens. And there are many, many, many glass liquor and wine bottles, household product bottles, medicine bottles. There are even lead crystal tablewares like decanters, stemware, and tumblers. Other objects include work-related artifacts like sharpening files and this horse bit up here. This is a curb bit. And my favorite, this redware handled redware pot with encrusted paint drips, evidence of a messy painting job. We have lighting related objects like a candle snuffer, a fireplace jam hook, which holds your fireplace tools, and hand crimped lamp chimney glass fragments. Even 18th century hand painted fireplace tiles that they likely salvaged from an older building. Clothing related items like buttons, beads, straight pins, and a lacing bodkin, and personal artifacts included a few small denomination coins, smoking pipe fragments, writing slates, and slate pencils. And these are really cool. Ebony-backed bone dominoes. Overall, these artifacts reflect the daily work and home life of working class Providence. Between 1841 and 1850, the 3 1820s era Snowtown houses were torn down and single and multifamily dwellings were built to replace the older structures. The Gaspee Street era is represented by 3 houses and at least 2 outbuildings located from north to south at 30, 32, and 36 Gaspee Street if you were on the street today. By 1849, George Morse had finally managed to purchase the land from Nicholas Brown and build his new house at 36 Gaspee Street in the rough location of what were Snowtown houses B and C. His daughter and son-in-law, Cynthia and Joseph Thornton, occupied another new structure at 32 Gaspee Street, built on top of Snowtown House B. And a third new building, 30 Gaspee, was built on the foundation of Snowtown House A, serving as a boarding house and beginning in the 1870s as Morse's grocery store. And here's a picture of Morse's houses in the Thornton House in 1873, and just shows you how densely packed and, you know, industrial with all these other little buildings mixed in it really looked at that point in Providence. The Gaspee Street era artifact assemblage is only half the size of the Snowtown assemblage, totaling just over 17,000 objects. Most came from the grocery at 30 Gaspee Street. These included at least 27 varieties of ceramic tablewares, plain and decorated, and included a few examples dating to the 17th and 18th century, as well as the mid-19th century ceramic styles that you see here. The glass artifacts included table glass with pressed, etched, and cased designs, and household bottles for beverages, medicines, and food storage. These examples on the right include a few medicines. This one's called Dyer's Healing Embrocation, and supposedly that cured cholera. And then this one is Professor Parker's Pleasant Worm Syrup, used to fight an extremely common problem for children in the 18th and 19th centuries. The one next to it is a base from a Hungarian mineral water bottle called Saxelaner's Bitterquell, and that was used as a laxative. And then in the bottom left of the photo is a pharmacy bottle marked C.B. Burrington. Charles Burrington was a pharmacist on Broad Street in Providence between about 1880 and 1891. The 30 Gaspee Street assemblage also had clothing and sewing related artifacts, collectible ceramic figurines, a brass drafting compass part, and smoking pipe fragments. One of the most interesting classes of artifacts from 30 Gaspee Street are the metalworking crucibles. These would have been used in jewelry making or some other fine metalworking or chemical industry. And so far, none of the identified residents seem to have worked in the jewelry industry. Rather, they included several unspecified laborers, an umbrella maker, a livery worker, a teamster, a tool company worker, and a wheelwright. Compared to the previous house, however, the Thorntons' house at 32 Gaspee Street had very few artifacts specifically associated with it. Only about 600 objects were found in the remains of the house foundation. The building's foundation components had been destroyed and very little evidence for its occupation remained. The few artifacts, though, were pretty interesting. They included decorated and undecorated tablewares, clothing fasteners, wrought iron hardware, metal cutlery and coins, and glass bottles manufactured mostly in the 18th and mid to late 19th centuries. The last house, Morse's dwelling at 36 Gaspee Street, unfortunately had the smallest number of artifacts of the three buildings, even though we know the most about George Morse. The remains were the most ephemeral and heavily disturbed of all of the Gaspee Street houses, and the only things that marked its location were the blue shale hearth, wood stains in the soil, and a small post hole. There were only 322 artifacts found in association with it, but it did have a wide variety of bottles, ceramic tablewares, and personal items. One example is this saucer, part of a matched set of blue sponged and transfer printed teaware with an American eagle motif. Very, very patriotic. A few noteworthy personal items are a religious cross pendant and dark purple black glass, possibly related with the Irish Catholic population, and one of only 2 sewing thimbles cataloged in the entire project. The thimbles embossed with the words "token of friendship" and would have been owned by one of the women living in the house. And so, what do all the artifacts tell us about the site's residents? Well, overall, the artifacts are typical for a working class neighborhood like Snowtown. There are cheaper, minimally decorated ceramic tablewares and teawares, and overall fewer, costlier ceramic and glass types, all of which are common for sites like this. There are artifacts relating to general labor, as well as mechanical and craftsman occupations, and personal items belonging to men, women, and children. There are many building-related artifacts as well, evidence for the use and reuse of architectural components and the construction and demolition so much a part of these marginalized neighborhoods. One of DCP's more interesting archaeological interpretations was linking broken glass vessels and window glass in one of the houses and architectural repairs in one of the other Snowtown houses directly to the Snowtown Riot. City records note that one of the houses destroyed during the riot was on the property owned by Nicholas Brown, and the land records placed the archaeological site on one of Brown's properties. And so the archaeological evidence for structural repairs may support this idea. It was a very compelling argument that DCP had put forward and is a possibility given what we know about the neighborhood. And there are some standout artifacts or artifact types, things you might not expect people to own in a neighborhood such as this. Yes, they were poor, but they also had access to and interest in items that are not typically associated with the working class. But remember, Some of these people worked as domestic servants in wealthier households and were also porters, moving goods on and off of ships that had come into the port of Providence. As I've mentioned, there are costly transfer printed ceramics and lead crystal tablewares, but there are also writing slates and slate pencils, dominoes and marbles, children's ceramics, dressing combs and toiletry objects, buttons, beads, padlocks, smoking pipe fragments, even a bottle of French hair tonic, and a lid from a pot of Jules Howell's shaving compound. Those are up here in the corner. All of these items give us a glimpse into the daily lives and material culture of the people who lived in Snowtown, something we cannot easily access through the historical record. There is some information about some of the people of Snowtown, and Andrew's going to talk about that now.
Yeah, so in addition to the archaeological record, there is actually a surprising amount of information that we can glean from the archives. And I say surprising because most of the people in Snowtown either did not have the ability or the time or the inclination to write things down about themselves. But through looking at the Providence Town Council records, federal and state censuses, town directories, the writs and warrants housed in the Providence City Archives, the court records, and the probate records, you can actually piece together a reasonable portrait of a few Snowtown residents by meticulously combing through all of those records. And we've got a few of those that I want to share with you right now. So there's about 3 people that we have pretty good information on that I can share with you. The first being actually someone we've already met, George Morse and his wife Betty, who lived in one of the houses uncovered during the archaeological dig. So Heather's been over some of this, but the censuses placed them in or around Snowtown from the 1820s to the 1870s. And they also show that they had family nearby. Betsy's widowed sister, Huldah Young, lived next door to George and Betty at one point. And Betsy and Huldah's parents actually lived on Smith Street, possibly in Snowtown, but also possibly across the river on North Main Street. The city directories list George as a laborer or a drayman, which is a carrier or a carter or a teamster, until he opened a grocery sometime in the 1870s. And so these few scraps of records actually tell us a great deal and complement the portrait of daily life seen in the archaeological record. It shows that these are people who have made a life in Snowtown. They spend most of their lives there, nearly 50 years, and they work hard and open a business. Furthermore, their extended family is nearby. It kind of looks like George Morse chose to move into Snowtown to live near his wife's parents and sister. They kind of seem like stable middle-class property owners and entrepreneurs. It's not Benefit Street, but they're not doing too badly. So this is kind of a far cry from this idea of brothels and brawling sailors. The next person I want to take a look at is Abraham Gibbs, who's one of the Black residents that we know a decent amount about. So Abraham Gibbs is born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1756. We're not sure if he is enslaved or free, but he, or if he was born enslaved or free, but he moves from Smithfield to Providence around 1788 with his first wife, Sarah Gibbs, who's the daughter of a Black Revolutionary War veteran. And after she dies, he remarries to a woman named Jenny. Abraham Gibbs starts out as a laborer and a mariner, and so he fits right in Snowtown. For Black men, being a sailor at this point was more than just an occupation. After the Revolution, one historian has called Black mariners the pillar of the Black middle class, because it was one of the few jobs in which Black men could potentially, not always potentially, earn pay equal to or better than white men based on their skills. So if you are an able seaman who is able to go up the rigging, you can potentially make more than an ordinary seaman who just hauls at a rope. It doesn't matter if, always if you're Black or white. If you have the skills, you get the pay. Gibbs eventually also acquires the skills of a cooper or barrel maker, another job with roots in Providence's maritime expansion, and he ended his life as a skilled artisan. Along the way, he also participated, as most Snowtown residents must have done, in the neighborhood's unofficial economy. We have records of him doing odd jobs and renting out rooms to boarders to make extra cash. He also became adept at moving within official structures of the state. We have records that he settled debts in court so he could navigate not only a complex neighborhood like Snowtown, but also kind of the emerging state apparatus of Rhode Island and Providence. We also know that he took a leading role in Providence's Black community. His name appears as a founding member of the Congdon Street Baptist Church, which was then called the African Union Meeting Society, in 1819. In addition, we also know that at least one other founding member, a man named Stephen Walmsley, also lived in Snowtown, but we're still researching him. Gibbs died in 1830 at about the age of 74, and one of the most telling documents related to him is the inventory of his estate made upon his death, which includes multiple pieces of large furniture and bedclothes, including 5 pillows, 1 pair of decanters and 12 wines, 3 looking glasses, 1 silver watch, and 1 old Bible and other books. And the deed records also show that he owned 2 houses in Snowtown. So putting all this together, he is in many ways a success story, especially given the challenges facing a free Black man in the early 19th century US. He starts out as a laborer and ends his days as a skilled artisan, a property owner, and a literate. Notice he has books in the house, a literate and an upstanding member of the community. Finally, I want to talk about Eliza Granger, who is really not an upstanding member of her community, but who does show how ambiguous these categories are, who is respectable and who is disorderly. So Granger was white, and she was widowed in 1824. Her husband had operated a livery stable on Westminster Street. So interestingly, like Morse, it also shows that people can choose to move into and out of Snowtown. It's a very, it's not just one group of people there and one group of people in the rest of Providence. It's a very permeable neighborhood with people moving in and out. So Granger had definitely moved to the neighborhood by 1826 when she bought a house and land on the south side of Smith Street for $1,000. And she set up shop there selling liquor. As we've seen, this was a pretty good way to make money in a port town like Providence. And this must have been a tempting proposition for many widows who experienced the death of a husband as both an emotional and an economic catastrophe. There are very few options open to women who cannot rely on a man earning an income at this time. And we do have records of many similar women, either widowed or unmarried, who carved out a living in Providence's marginal neighborhoods during the 1820s and 30s. These women run brothels, boarding houses, dance halls, liquor shops, or often something with a few shades of all of those things mixed together. But of course, they soon attracted the attention of the town authorities. So in 1826, the town council accused Eliza Granger of selling beer on Sundays. And a few years later, in 1830, the town brought legal action against her for selling liquor without a license. And in the end, she had to pay about $100 in fines and court fees. However, Granger's response to these setbacks shows how the divide between the people disapproving of Snowtown and the people they're disapproving of is not as clear-cut as you might think. In response to the 1826 complaint, we have a letter that she wrote to the council refusing to attend their meeting and telling them that Constable Edward Harwood could vouch for her good behavior. And one wonders how exactly the good constable was so familiar with her establishment. In 1830, then around the time of her legal troubles, the town council held a hearing to decide whether they should grant Eliza Granger a license to sell liquor legally. And arguing in this meeting on her behalf was a Mr. Brown. And this is almost certainly Nicholas Brown, one of the merchant Brown and Ives and one of the wealthiest men in Rhode Island at that time. The point here is that men like Constable Harwood and Nicholas Brown did not just look down on or abhor a place like Snowtown. They conducted business there and clearly had contacts with the residents. Often as landlords, Nicholas Brown did own plenty of property in Snowtown, but also clearly, as we can see with if he's going to a meeting to support Eliza Granger, there's probably a personal relationship there as well. So in addition to the archaeological record, I think putting that together with the archival documents really shows that Snowtown is not just a place where people drink and gamble and are generally debauched, but that it's a place where people are living, people are making, trying to live their lives as best they can. And now I think we're going to talk about the prison.
Yes. So another aspect that we're exploring is how Snowtown and its residents connected with other areas of the city. Recently, I've begun to reanalyze the artifact assemblage recovered from the foundations of the original Rhode Island State Prison Complex, a large and imposing structure built in 1838 on Great Point. This point of land that had just jutted out from the northern shore of the Great Salt Cove. You can see in the upper corner what it looked like on the 1875 atlas with the Cove Basin. Our company, PAL, had excavated the site back in 1997 before they built the Providence Place Mall. The foundations are under the northern end, or were under the northern end of the current Providence Place Mall. The prison was just down the street from the domestic houses that made up the North Shore site and likely connected many Snowtown residences and businesses to those that managed or temporarily resided within its walls. The exact nature of the connections between Snowtown and the prison aren't clear to me yet, but I'm working on it. I'm trying to sift through an enormous amount of information. The history of the Rhode Island prison system is fascinating, at least to me, beginning with colonial criminal sentences that focused on corporal punishments like whipping, disfigurement, or even execution. By the early Enlightenment, many had come to believe in criminal reform, the belief that a criminal could be turned from a path of crime into an upstanding citizen by placing them into a correctional institution to reflect and repent, learn a trade, and receive religious instruction. By the late 18th century, Rhode Island residents felt that there was a need for a state correctional institution. It took over 35 years and at least 9 different committees to finally begin construction on the state prison. The large and imposing edifice welcomed its first prisoners in 1838. The Providence County Jail inmates were also kept at the state prison building, creating as overcrowded, and considering this had been built on the muddy, swampy lands of the Cove, as miserable a place as you could possibly imagine. The living conditions were terrible. It was dark, wet, overcrowded, unsanitary, smelly, cold in the winter, hot in the summer. You get the picture. The long-term state inmates supposedly didn't tend to live very long, and the solitary, reflective life believed to be necessary for repentance tended to drive the inmates insane. Let's just say the basic intentions were good, but the implementation and the reality of the institution was not, for many, many reasons. By at least the 1860s, prison officials were clamoring for a new updated prison facility, and in 1878, the prisoners were transferred. Actually, they were physically marched on foot to the newly built Howard Adult Correctional Institution complex in Cranston. There are many official records that are available in the archives: prison intake books, annual reports, official correspondence, etc. And some do talk about the day-to-day operation in the prison. For example, all inmates in both the state prison and county jail populations were required to work 6 days a week. Shoemaking was the first official work task assigned to the prisoners in 1838 and continued all through its operations in Providence. Prisoners also periodically made furniture or clothing, and at one point made decorative ladies' fans for a few years in the 1840s. Now, this was an incredible story involving marketing in New York City merchant shops, bribing the warden with a new dress for his wife to speed up production, illegally allowing an inmate, particularly skillful at painting, out of prison, so he could go on a trip to New York City to meet with the merchants. In the end, it wasn't profitable, and supposedly the stress of the entire enterprise directly contributed to the early death of the first prison warden. By 1851, the prison directors had shifted prisoners, however, from making products to be sold by the warden to selling prisoner labor to local businesses. The state sold prison labor to make shoes, textiles, wire goods, furniture, and do foundry work on site or near the prison grounds. And then fast forward to just over 100 years to 1994, when plans for the Providence Place Mall had been developed. That year, PAL conducted an archaeological survey of the property, knowing that there were likely sensitive archaeological features on the site. The excavations uncovered a massive complex of building foundations, drainage lines, cisterns and wells, trash pits, and other yard features, producing just over 25,000 artifacts. Almost half of these artifacts are directly associated with the inmates and prison staff who live there. There are lots and lots of architectural and structural objects, mess hall ceramic plates and tankards, food prep and storage vessels, and fancier decorated tablewares, probably owned by the staff, are used for the wealthier prisoners. A lot of debtors ended up here, and also for visitors. There are fragments of bottles for medicine, liquor, and both. Personal objects like tobacco pipes and spittoon fragments. There are writing slates and pencils. The prison population at this location were highly literate. They taught, they had a schoolroom that had ink bottles, a poultry fountain, buttons, buckles, shoe and boot fragments, and thousands of animal bones from cows, pigs, chickens, a cat, a dog, rodents, and codfish. There are industrial and manufacturing objects like whetstones, bone button making debris, shoe nails and heel fragments, etc. They even found one of the 4.5-foot high cell doors with its 6 by 8-inch window and a couple of very heavy iron safes believed to be used for securing county jail inmates' personal effects. Well, I've only just begun analyzing the history and artifact data for the prison site. I want to know more about the daily life of the inmates and staff and what the artifacts can contribute to our knowledge of them. What do we know about the people who lived, worked, or were imprisoned there? Who were they? What were their crimes or occupations? Where did they come from? Who were their families? Even if they got visitors or goods brought to them by family members. I want to know what the artifacts can tell us about their work, dining habits, medical ailments, even their leisure time. These are the types of things I'm trying to piece together. We're also on the lookout for more personal historical records. I would really like to know more about what it was like to grow up at the prison. There were a series of different wardens in charge of the prison, and they lived in the keepers' house with their families. In particular, General Nelson Vial took charge of the prison in 1867 and ran the prison at both of its locations. Hold on. Until his death in 1903. Sorry, I printed it out and I didn't print out the last page. In the 1860s, he lived in the keeper's house with his wife, Mary, and 2 young children, Grace and Nelson. I cannot imagine what it was like raising small children in an environment like that. And one manuscript that came to light a few years ago was an 1867 diary kept by one of the Watchmen, Robert Dickey. In it, he writes about the daily activities, the living conditions, and life in Providence for a young man. He talks of weather, a little bit about his work at the prison, and the rest is about his social life, family, and politics back home, or his colleagues. At times, he writes about the inmates, the crimes they committed, the trouble they were causing, etc. And his jobs at the prison, including guarding the gates and checking in visitors, giving medical attention and shaving, supervising prisoners working in the prison workshop, and even disciplining inmates. The Rhode Island Historical Society bought this diary at auction just a few years ago, and the executive director, Morgan Grief, is transcribing and annotating the diary, preparing it for publication, and I'm hoping we'll be able to collaborate on a material culture analysis to kind of add to the overall aspect of the history, or the history of the prison. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andrew for the conclusions.
Okay, so I hope that the deep dive into history and archaeology has sufficiently complicated the initial picture of Snowtown as a vile place full of disorderly and undesirable people. Through the archaeology, we can access the texture of everyday life and the labor of the neighborhood. We can imagine someone sitting down to play a game of dominoes, or saving up money to buy one of the costlier sets of ceramics that Heather mentioned. Through the historical records, we can create fragmentary but still evocative portraits of a few of the residents of Snowtown. These people are not a disorderly mass or a social problem, but individuals trying to make a living in a complicated, turbulent, and often harsh urban environment. Before we wrap up, I just want to underline why Heather and I think the history of Snowtown is so important and why both of us are part of the State House Restoration Committee's Snowtown project. This is a group of historians, archaeologists, artists, librarians, and community activists, some of whom I think are also on at this talk right now, who are all as dedicated to researching and sharing as much information about Snowtown as we are. Of course, we all think that the history and individuals we've uncovered are interesting in and of themselves, but there is a bigger picture here. By understanding Snowtown, we can better understand Providence's history as a whole. It is unquestionable that Snowtown played a major role in the city's political and social history. For starters, as Sparkle pointed out at the very beginning, the riot targeting Snowtown led to Providence to switch from a town to a city government. If that's not political transformation, I don't know what is. Snowtown also served as an incubator for some of the early institutions of Providence's Black community, such as the African Union Meeting Society, which included Snowtown residents as its founding members. Finally, understanding Snowtown and the lives of its residents shed new light on many other aspects of city history that we've touched on in this talk. The town council's concerns about social disorder in the 1820s and 30s, the professionalization of Providence police and establishment of Rhode Island's first state prison, and the coming of the railroads. The voices and experiences of the people of Snowtown are often left out of these stories, and only by injecting them back in can we gain the full picture. Thank you all for your attention, and Heather and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, my name is Peter Van Erp. I have a question about that the diary from the prison guard. It mentioned a man who was the doomed man who was scheduled to be executed in I think it was 1869. And I was under the impression that John Gordon was the last man executed by the state in 1845.
He was. So this was Crowe. Was it Robert Crowe, I think? And
Yeah.
what it was is he killed someone on the high seas, and it was considered a federal crime. And the closest state with an available prison was Rhode Island. So he was sent to the Rhode Island State Prison, even though he committed a federal crime, because the death penalty was illegal in Rhode Island at that time. This was 1867. And so in Dickey's diary, he talks about going to visit him, and he's, Mr. Crowe, he's resigned to his fate. He's ready to die. And then he talks about the day he goes in and says, the people of Rhode Island have said that we don't do those sorts of things. So guess what? You're in for life instead. You won't be killed. And I guess he was not very happy about it. He seemed a little depressed, was kind of the language that Robert Dickey wrote in his diary. So you're right, but it was just one of those weird occurrences in 1867. So
Thank you very much.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
I'm not sure that life in that prison was preferable.
Well, Thomas Dorr was incarcerated there, and he was in there. It was not a good thing, and I think he was pardoned, or he got out of prison a short while later, but he did not live longer than a year or so after he was out of prison. The other thing that's really interesting is he was in there in the 1840s, and he was in there when they were making ladies' fans, those fancy painted ladies' fans. And some of the ones he supposedly worked on are in RISD's museum collection, which is kind of cool. So. Any other questions?
Oh, I have another one. In the Snowtown Riot, the first person killed was shot on Olney's Lane by an African-American man. But it never, I read the Park Service booklet on that, and it never identifies that man or ever that he was brought to justice, that he somehow evaded being, arrested for that crime.
I think they end up arresting William Jordan for that crime. He dies in prison. He dies of illness. So there is a trial in in the court records, state of Rhode Island versus like several of these guys. But it's kind of a moot point because the guy dies in prison before the trial ever happens.
Yeah, and whether that was a natural or an unnatural death is for us to speculate.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think given what Heather has said about prison conditions, both are probably equally likely.
Well, we have
Sylvia.
Sylvia.
Wait, unmuted. Awesome. Thank you so much. You corroborated some things for me and added a few interesting tidbits that I can add to my play. Thank you. And you'll see. So the guy, did I get this correctly? The black man who did the first shot on Olney Street was a sailor?
Yeah. There's court testimony. There's like 3 or 4 guys that they get depositions from, and every one of them says, I was there, but the other guy fired the gun. So it's a little unclear, but yeah, there's about, I think, 3 or 4 different people who are accused.
Okay, well, we have a comment in the chat. Can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. It says, this is fascinating. My wife has the cafe and Amtrak station, and I ask her now how her day was in Snowtown. In every city I ever lived in, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, and Providence, there's always a hidden city.
It is true.
That's definitely true.
Yeah. Yeah, I gave a talk to a class at RISD in the fall, and one of them was an art student who has since done like a temporary art installation down near the Amtrak station and around there to kind of, she talked a lot about how these are the kind of hidden things that you just don't know. They're under your feet and you just don't know. And so that was kind of an interesting thing too, that people are still learning about this. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have any research about hardscrabble in the 1824 riot.
That would be Ted Coleman.
Ed,
right,
yeah.
Ted? Sorry, Ted. But he's done a lot of research on hardscrabble, and he's kind of doing a cultural geography. It's really cool of this area of Providence, being able to show who owned what property, how the neighborhood, there wasn't really a boundary. It was amorphous. It changed all the time, but who was where, who owned what, how things changed. It's actually a really interesting cultural geography and history of the neighborhoods. And he's done a lot of work on hardscrabble.
Sure. Basically, hardscrabble and Snowtown were both neighborhoods on Smith Hill. One with Snowtown being on the south side of the hill and hardscrabble being on the north side of the hill, up about where the Orm Street off-ramp comes onto Orm Street now. So, and let's see, Snowtown develops a little bit before hardscrabble. Hardscrabble doesn't start to develop into housing until about 1815. And like Snowtown, it survives its riot and goes on to prosper for pretty much the rest of the 19th century until it gets in the short history, the Irish begin to move in the 1850s. Eastern European Jews begin to move in the 1870s and 1880s, and it stays pretty much a Jewish enclave until they build 95. And with some black residents in there too. It's never quite the concentration of black housing like it is in the 1820s and 1830s.
When did they build 95 through that section? Was it the 1950s, 60s?
64.
64, okay.
My uncle actually remembers that neighborhood.
Really?
Oh, wow.
But he told me that there was actually a church there, and by the end of the 19th century, Hardscrabble had sort of been renamed by the newspapers to Squaw Hollow. So you can actually find that entry in the King's Pocket Book of Providence from 1882. But they're talking about the same place. Hardscrabble and Squaw Hollow are the same place.
Do you know where that name came from? Is there any?
The Hardscrabble or Squaw Hollow?
Squaw Hollow.
My guess is that given the timing, it comes out of the wars against the Plains Indians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, late 19th century. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's just another way to demean the neighborhood without acknowledging its history.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ted.
Thanks, Ted.
That's the short Hardscrabble.
Watch this space for more.
Does anyone else have questions and would like to come on the mic to ask your question, or you can type it in the chat?
Well, thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you very much, everyone.
We appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. This
We
was
always
great.
like to
Thank you,
share what we've
Sparkle.
learned,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So,
All right, well, I guess there are no more questions, but if you do have questions, you can always drop by the memorial and get in touch with some of the rangers there, because we know how to get in touch with Heather and Andrew at PAL. Okay, well,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
great. Bye, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're
Right.
welcome.
Great.
Thank you.